Let me talk about climate change. You made it the centerpiece of your presidential campaign. In some ways, you were the only one that really grounded your campaign in a substantive issue. And maybe that was given the moment we were living in with Trump and all that stuff, that it, in some ways, I found it noble, but maybe you were swimming upstream. And yet, I would argue it probably gave you even more momentum to do some things in your state. But what did you learn from trying to create an urgency around this issue that government should be involved in the solution? What did you learn in your conversations with voters that says, when you talk about these issues, talking about them this way, not that way? Or what advice would you give to other politicians who want to get voters to understand the urgency better on their terms, not necessarily on my terms or your terms, but on their terms? What have you found to be most effective?
So I'm going to tell you a story that doesn't really match the script, but I'm going to tell you a story because you appreciate campaign stories, right?
Oh yeah,
You're,
I love a
you're
good fish
political.
story, and I love a good campaign story.
You're
Yeah.
political. So I'll tell you part of my learning experience. So I went to Hamburg, Iowa. It was my very first event, and we were going to focus on climate change because there'd been a
You were
horrendous
fired up,
flood.
I bet, right? First event, you're like gung
First
ho.
event, first event in Iowa, and because there'd been a horrendous flood swept through town.
That's
It
right.
was a magnificently choreographed event. We had a guy who actually was Al Gore's advisor, whose mother's house was destroyed in the flood.
Mm.
And we could go through, and we had, 8 or 9 cameras and the whole radio, and everybody was there. It was a wonderful event. We could see where the water had come up halfway up the windowsills. There were all these silos that had collapsed in the
Hmm.
flood. So all this wheat was just laying out all over the ground. I mean, it was a very good graphic illustration. And that place had never seen a flood before. It had been there for 150 years, and that town had never seen a flood before. So this was a perfect example of climate caused disasters that we now are experiencing. And the thing was going well. I talked to a lot of people there. They all thought that we should do something about climate change. And it was really a great visit. And as I was going to get in the car, my young staffer, who I didn't know very well, says, you got to come over here, Gov. You got to meet Henry over here at the auto body shop. And I go, no, we're done. We got to go. He says, no, you have to come see Henry. Everybody knows Henry in town. I said, no, we're done. He says, look, you got to come. I said, okay. So we walk across town. We go into Henry's shop, auto body shop, and there's NRA posters and, Dixie flags. And I said, no, this is not a place I want to
Not
be.
sure I'm in the right spot for a
And
caucus
so
goer, huh?
I
You weren't
saw
looking for
Henry.
a
I
new
said,
caucus
Henry,
captain.
nice to meet you, Henry, but we have to be going. And the press noticed that I was a little reticent to talk to him.
Yeah.
So the press came to him and said, Henry, what do you think of this climate change that the governors talk about? He says, oh, that's a bunch of malarkey. That flood was just because the Corps of Engineers fouled it up. And the first lesson I learned is this is a tough business that we're in. So that's a little campaign story. So here's what I've learned is that you have to talk to people about this issue where they live. You can't lecture people, obviously. You need to talk to them about where they live. You need to find out what they care about. What do you care about? What's important to you and your family? And that's the first part of any discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you find that out, to talk to them about possibly they might be interested in this question. If it's a job for their kid coming out of college, we got good ways to say, hey, here's a good reason that your child may have a good career. If it's your crop that you're trying to sell, well, we sure hope that your crop isn't one of those silos that is being washed away.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a child with asthma, you say, what's making your child, because we have an epidemic of asthma right now. So the first thing I've learned is to just meet people where they are and talk to them about their personal ambitions and fears, and that's the way to move forward.
If you
But
get at it,
I'll mention one other thing though.
okay.
Americans still don't understand this phenomenon. Only
I
one
agree.
out of 5 Americans know there's a scientific consensus about this, that we're wrapping the earth in a blanket of carbon dioxide, and that there is a scientific consensus about this. So there's still a lot of basic information that we need to share with Americans. It's one of the reasons I like the Climate Power Accountability Group holding Trump accountable so we can share this scientific information with people.
One of the things that I've wondered about that I'd like to see more politicians lean into, particularly locally, is the adaptation issue, right? Which is no matter what happens, rather than debate whose fault it is, we all have to live with this new environment. We all have to
Right.
survive and hopefully thrive in it. Have you found if you start with sort of, hey, are you tired of of the high cost of insurance for your home because you live this close to a body of water? Well, here's why it costs more to live this close to a body of water. I mean, it, it, and this is why maybe we need to build a barrier, or maybe we need to do this. Um, is is that a better way in with some people? You know, it's like my daughter she's a marine science major. She did an internship in Escambia County, which is in the Panhandle of Florida. It's a pretty conservative area, and they told them never to use the phrase climate change. Talk about fishing, talk about conservation, talk about making sure you have plenty of good places to fish. Why do people move to Florida? You know, for the outdoors. Um, Figuring out how to speak essentially native languages, no matter where you are in the country.
Yeah, well, that kind of comes back to what I was saying is you talk
Mhm.
about the specific things in people's lives, including fish. We've had all the kelp disappeared. I live on Bainbridge Island, Washington. All the bull kelp have disappeared. We used to be ringed with bull kelp, these forests, and that's what the salmon depend on. So if you like to go fishing, it's a big deal. So yes to that part of your question. But I haven't, and by the way, the insurance thing is so profound. I mean, you're not going to be able to get insurance in many
Look,
of
the
these
insurance
places.
industry is going to force government's hand here, right? Like,
Governments,
they're going to
government's
have
going
no
to have,
choice.
you're
Yeah.
going to, government's going to have to step into the role of the insurance industry. It's going to be extremely costly. You're going to
Look,
have
you're at
much more
Bainbridge
money.
Island. This is a nice place to live where you are.
Right.
I'm going to guess that the insurance is higher than any property tax you pay.
I can't tell you for sure that's true, but whatever it is, it's going to go up because
Right.
we've had fires even in the western. We're the evergreen state. We have a little rain here, but we're having fires in the western side of Washington State now. I've had two whole towns burned down. Of course, Trump denied us emergency relief from that. But coming back from your central question, I agree that you want to talk to people if they're a fisherman or fisher. You talk about
Mhm.
fish. If there's asthma in their family, you talk about asthma. You talk about those issues, not the global crisis, right? It's not the
Right.
planet that's the problem; it's your life.
Right. It's your
I
home.
haven't found though that on occasion you'll get a Republican say, "Yes, I'm willing to finance a new dike, right, to protect the town."
Mhm.
You're getting some of that, but that is not translated to them saying, and by the way, I want to do something about fossil fuels destroying and causing
Mhm.
this problem in the first place. It's been so disappointing that we have not been able to find Republicans in office to be able to help us on this. And I keep hoping that's going to change, but it is not. The only Republicans really helping us are the ones that are out of office. So
It's
right
true.
now, we got to replace some
Well, look
people
what
that
Lisa
just don't get
Murkowski
it.
said. There is a culture of fear among Republicans that's speaking out. I mean,
You
retribution is real.
you could sense that in her tone of her
I
voice
mean,
when she was talking about that.
the people that got where that Laura Loomer went into his office, it was like anybody who had worked with Mike Pompeo or Tom Cotton were essentially escorted out of the Pentagon just for
No,
who
there's
they worked for. I mean, that's right out of. I mean, come up with your hypothetical from Europe in the 1930s. That's right there. We're just doing a purge. You're associated with my political enemies. Get out of here.
yeah, I agree that there's pressures from potential primaries for Republican office holders. There's no question about this. But why the hell are you in office if you're not going to do some basic things?
I know.
Probably 34% of the Republicans in Congress know climate change is potentially devastating to us. They
Yeah.
know that. They don't publicly express it. They know it, but they won't lift a damn finger to help us out because they're afraid of that. And I'm just going like, you don't deserve to be in office, and we're gonna retire you for private
Yeah.
life.